May 12, 2015. Night over Northeast Philadelphia. A northbound intercity train slips out of downtown. Passengers texting, checking emails, half asleep against the windows. Minutes later, 7 coaches and a locomotive are scattered around a tight curve. 8 people are dead, more than 100 are injured, and the busiest passenger rail line in America has one of its worst modern disasters. This is cruel lore, real-world catastrophes, told with respect, not jump scares. We break down how ordinary systems fail and why people never see it coming. Tonight we're on the Northeast Corridor, where trains roar between Washington and Boston under layers of signaling, rules, and federal oversight. At a bend called Frankford Junction, one moment of lost awareness and one missing safety system turned a routine trip into a national headline. The train is Amtrak Northeast Regional 188, running from Washington, D.C. to New York City. Around 9:10 p.m., it departs Philadelphia's 30th Street Station on time. On board are roughly 245 people in total, passengers and crew, a cross-section of everyday life. Business travelers, students, tourists, people just trying to get home. The line curves away from the city through old industrial neighborhoods. At the front, a modern electric locomotive hauls 7 stainless steel passenger cars. Ahead lies a sharp left-hand curve at Frankford Junction with a permanent speed limit of 50 miles per hour, a restriction every engineer on this route is trained to know. Later, investigators will pull the train's event recorder and watch the numbers climb. On the straight track leading in, the speed rises through the 70s, 80s, into the 90s as it approaches that bend. And on this section of track, in May 2015, the main automatic system designed to stop an overspeeding train has not yet been switched on. Around 9:21 p.m., train 188 reaches the Frankford Junction curve. Instead of easing down to around 50, it is traveling a little over 100 miles per hour. The engineer finally throws the train into emergency braking, but physics is already in charge. The recorded peak is about 106, and at the instant the locomotive leaves the rails, it's still doing just over 100. The locomotive and all 7 cars derail. Several coaches roll onto their sides. At least one is torn open. Seats rip loose, overhead luggage becomes airborne, and passengers are hurled across aisles into walls and ceilings. Windows shatter. Lights fail. For many people, there is no time to process what's happening. Only a violent tumble, the sound of metal folding, and then darkness. When the movement finally stops, 8 passengers are dead. Well over 100 are injured, many of them seriously. At that moment, all anyone on board knows is pain, confusion, and a desperate need to get out. The sound of the crash rips through the Kensington and Port Richmond neighborhoods. A roar, then a metallic crunch that locals know isn't normal freight noise. Residents run toward the tracks and find coaches on their sides, the locomotive skewed off the line, people climbing out of broken windows and walking in shock along the ballast. Inside the tilted cars, passengers use the blue glow of their phones to find exits and each other. Some step down from side doors and shattered windows. Others are pinned under torn-out seats and interior panels, or wedged in twisted sections of car body. Emergency calls flood 911. Police, firefighters, and medics arrive within minutes. Crews bring ladders and cutting tools, working carriage by carriage, forcing open doors that now face the sky, cutting into roofs and walls. Nearby buildings and schools are turned into triage centers. Hospitals across the city receive a surge of patients with fractures, head injuries, internal trauma, and shock. Doctors and nurses are suddenly dealing with one of the largest mass casualty events in Philadelphia in years. In the weeks that follow, the National Transportation Safety Board reconstructs the journey almost second by second. Investigators inspect the locomotive, the track, signals, crew schedules, radio traffic. They download the event recorder's data and rebuild exactly what the train did. They don't find a broken rail. They don't find a failed signal. Toxicology tests on the engineer are negative. There's no evidence of drug or alcohol use, no proof of phone use in the critical minutes before the crash, no obvious medical event that would explain a blackout. Instead, the focus narrows to a simple, very human failure: loss of situational awareness. Minutes before the derailment, A nearby commuter train reported that its windshield had been struck and damaged by some kind of object. Emergency radio chatter went out over the line. The board's report concludes that this incident likely diverted the engineer's attention at a critical moment. Believing he had already passed the slow 50-mile-per-hour curve and was on a section where much higher speeds were allowed, he accelerated when he should have been slowing down. In its probable cause statement, the NTSB is blunt. The engineer's acceleration to 106 miles per hour as the train approached the 50-mile-per-hour curve caused the derailment. Contributing to the crash, they add, were the absence of an active automatic speed control system on that stretch of track and the fact that the cars were not designed to protect occupants well during a high-speed overturning accident. That missing system has a name: Positive Train Control. On paper, Positive Train Control (PTC) is exactly the safety net that should have caught this mistake. It's a network of onboard computers, radio links, and trackside equipment that constantly monitors where trains are and how fast they're going. If a train is about to blow a stop signal or enter a sharp curve too fast, PTC can step in and automatically slow or stop it, even if the engineer doesn't react in time. Years before this crash, Congress had already ordered major railroads to install PTC. Deadlines had been extended, testing had dragged on, and some corridors were still in the rollout phase. On other parts of the Northeast Corridor, the system was already active or nearly ready. But at Frankford Junction in May 2015, the technology existed, the equipment was in place, and it still wasn't turned on. The safety board states it in plain language. If Positive Train Control had been active on that section of track, it would have enforced the speed limit and the derailment of Train 188 would not have happened. Behind those technical findings are people. Among the 8 who died were professionals, students, travelers with plans and families and futures. Survivors have described being thrown across the car, crawling through broken windows, and seeing strangers bleeding and trapped under seats. Some walked away that night and only later realized how close they'd come to dying. Others left the scene on stretchers or didn't leave at all. In the months and years after the crash, lawsuits piled up. Congress raised the cap on what Amtrak could pay in a single accident, and the company eventually agreed to a settlement worth hundreds of millions of dollars for victims and their families. Alongside the civil cases came criminal charges. The engineer was eventually charged with involuntary manslaughter, causing a catastrophe, and multiple counts of reckless endangerment under state law. Years later, a jury found him not guilty on all counts. For the court, that night at Frankford Junction was a catastrophic human error inside a flawed system, not a crime proven beyond reasonable doubt. For many survivors and relatives, that legal outcome sits uneasily alongside the memory of overturned coaches and emergency lights at the curve. Rail safety has always advanced in the shadow of wrecks. Over the past century, each new signaling system, each automatic brake, each rule change usually has a specific disaster behind it. The derailment of Amtrak 188 now lives in that lineage. After 2015, Amtrak and federal regulators accelerated the rollout of Positive Train Control across the Northeast Corridor. Reports from Amtrak's own oversight bodies note that PTC is now installed and operating on the tracks the company owns or controls, and they explicitly cite the Philadelphia accident, 8 killed, scores injured, as one of the reasons it had to be finished. Training material for locomotive crews now uses this crash as a case study in distraction and situational awareness. A reminder that a modern locomotive cab is still a human workplace, with human limitations. Today, trains still glide through the Frankford Junction curve. The rails, the ballast, the overhead wires look almost unchanged. The real difference is invisible. Computers quietly checking speed and location, ready to intervene if any future engineer makes the same mistake. By raw numbers, this is not the deadliest rail crash in U.S. history, but for people who watched it unfold in real time. Phone alerts buzzing, live helicopter shots of overturned cars, interviews with shaken survivors. It is one of the defining rail disasters of the modern era. Next time you sit on a late-night train and feel the carriage lean into a curve, remember that your safety rests on rules, technology, and lessons written in wreckage. At Frankford Junction, those lessons cost 8 lives. This has been Cruel Lore, the Amtrak 188 derailment, modern America's most infamous train crash. Travel safe and respect the rails.